Hey, InterVarsity alumni. This is After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. This is both an exciting and potentially tricky transition that you're making, and you might feel a little unsure about the coming weeks and months. We're here to provide you with expert advice, practical skills, and plenty of encouragement as you learn how to keep saying yes to Jesus in your new context. This is After 4, and this podcast is for you, alumni. What's up, alumni? Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele. Today, we're diving into a new series. For the rest of 2024, we're going to be talking about money. What's happening internally for us as we engage with money? How do we use it wisely in our personal finances? And how do we use it generously as a resource for God's kingdom? It's all coming your way because for many of you, you're now hard at work in a non-class environment, except for you brand new teachers out there. And rather than paying to do that work, you are now getting a paycheck. And your relationship with that paycheck is vitally important and has a more significant impact on your discipleship with Jesus than you might realize or think about on a daily basis. So for the next couple of months, we want to help you continue to be thoughtful and strategic about what you're doing when that check drops into your account at the end of each pay cycle. To kick things off, we're chatting with Emily Francis. Emily has a lot of experience covering a range of topics to help InterVarsity students make the transition to life after graduation. You might remember she actually joined us at the beginning of the year to talk about ending well with friends on campus, and I am excited to have her back to start this series as she helps us think about our personal narrative with money, the experiences we've had in the past that shape how we think about and interact with money on a daily basis. So let's get this series started. Here's Emily, and this one's for you, alumni. Emily, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Well, hey, we had such a great time last time that it seemed inevitable that we were going to have to do this again, I think.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be back on here. It was a blast last time we did it.
Great. I feel the same way. Well, Emily, before we jump in, for people who didn't join us for January's episode, as we were talking about ending well on campus with friends and broader relationships there, you gave a bit of an introduction during that episode. Would you just give us another intro here and help us get to know you, Emily?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia. I serve as the Assistant Regional Director of Staff Development and Fundraising for the Virginia region of InterVarsity. Before that, as a campus staff for many years at University of Virginia here in Charlottesville, which is also where I went, and also served an intern year doing some community college ministry. And now I live here with my husband and cat and a little baby on the way, which is fun.
Yes. And by the time people are listening to this, I mean, baby will have been there. So
yeah.
Excited.
It's crazy to think about.
I know. We are broadcasting to the future here. So it'd be exciting to know what kind of things have gone on with you and your family by the time this airs. That's really great. Emily, as I said, thanks again for joining us. And as you know, we're stepping into a new series on After 4 to round out our 2024 season. We're looking at finances, stewardship, generosity, all things money that we'll be talking about in these final weeks of 2024. And my hope is that you and I together can help lay a foundation, establish a good starting point. The longer that I live, the more interactions that I have with money and talking to other people about money, the more that I just am convinced that money and the status of our heart are very closely tied to one another. Whether or not we recognize it, whether or not we are intentional about it, it just is. And I imagine that you and I will get into some of those things as we talk today. Those things will continue to come up as our series moves forward. And so because of that reality, I'm really glad that we're taking time to just pause and figure out okay, where's a good starting point? And that's my first question for you, Emily, is there are so many things that we could talk about. I mean, there are entire podcasts, radio shows, trainings that are dedicated to this vast topic. So with all the material that we could cover, in your experience, where do you suggest that we start this conversation?
Yeah, I think when we come to this conversation, the place we most want to start is the really practical. And we will talk about
Yeah.
that. I'm sure you're going to have episodes about that. We can touch on that. But our question that we most often first start with is, what am I supposed to do? Tell me, how do I make more money? Where do I put my money? And if we do that, we short circuit the process of the Lord kind of doing the deeper work around
Hmm.
our view of money. And so, I mean, the place I love to start is so basic, but it's to ask what thoughts and feelings come up when you hear words like money and finances and wealth. Like, literally, as we're starting to talk about income and giving, we all have some kind of emotional response to that. It could be apathy, it could be shame, it could be guilt, it could be fear. But we've been around narratives of money for our whole lives, and it has shaped something really deep in us that there's
Hmm.
some truth we believe about money and income. And if we don't do the work of understanding what that is, we're going to pull that straight into the way that we interact with the really practicals of things like budgeting and saving and giving. So it's always helpful to start with what comes up as you hear these words. Maybe even as people are just listening to us talk, they can pause and just notice what's going on in them. Is it a desire to skip to the practical stuff at the end? Is it a visceral response of, oh, I really don't
Hmm.
want to think about how money was talked about in my life? But I think, as I'll say probably many times in the next couple minutes, like, so much about money and tithing and what the Bible says in these areas is because the Lord knows that this is a really insidious and tricky place for us as
Hmm.
people. We put identity into money and wealth really, really easily, and it's very subtle. I think, unlike other sins, things like greed and idolatry of money are just hard to identify. And
Yeah.
so, if we don't start with some of the deeper heart work of what do I believe about this? How do I see the Lord in this place? Then we're not really leaning into the discipleship, and we're just going to carry those kind of unhealthy patterns with us right into even some of the best practices.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like even if we have really good intentions about what we would like to do with our money, that if we haven't done some of this heart stuff, there's almost a default mode that we will tend towards, and if we don't address what that default mode brings in, then we might have the best of intentions, but we will not. More than likely, we will not actually pursue those good intentions that we have for money.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of different things that have shaped the way that we think about money. And for my own story, I would say my parents had a pretty healthy relationship with it and tried to talk to us about it as kids. I know many friends and have talked with many students about how money was just something that you never talked about. And I think
Hmm.
the less it was talked about, the more that created almost this mystery. And I would even say shame around, like, that's just not a conversation we have. You don't ever talk about what you spend, what you save, which almost just makes it this really dark thing. Like,
Hmm.
it's this corner that you don't touch. And
Yeah.
we know that it's important to talk about all these things in community. So for some people, it might be like, we just never talked about money, or that was my mom or my dad's role, and we weren't supposed to ask questions about it. In my family, my dad did most of the finances. He is incredibly he's a big saver, I'll
Okay.
say. And so for us, the message that he sent, and I think in healthy ways and also in some unhealthy ways, was, the most responsible thing you can do with money is save it. So
Hmm.
learning to be really fiscally responsible. Uh, there's not, that's not an evil message, but I think we
Right.
tend to receive this, either the idea from our parents that money buys happiness, like money is the solution. If we had more money, we could get this. Or growing up, I just, whenever we had a problem, it was solved with money or this answer of buying something. Or we grew up in a scarcity mindset where there was never enough. And so, money is maybe the root of all evil. Like, having a lot of money is what corrupts people, or
Hmm.
if only we had a lot of money, we would be better off. So these are all just examples of, I think, narratives that are subtle, but we're picking up from our parents. And I just kind of receive this narrative like, it's responsible to save. A responsible person does not spend like on whatever they want. They need to, have a lot in their savings. I would feel guilt when I would go out and spend more than $15 on dinner. I didn't want to do anything without really thinking through, is that okay? I even felt a
Yeah.
lot of guilt around buying extra things. I would like only shop at Goodwill for clothing. And it really created in me this scarcity mindset, like there's never really enough. And so I need to always be putting money away. And kind of the money is the root of all evil. Like I need to not be
Hmm.
too attached to this. It's bad to
Yeah.
depend too much on spending. And I brought that with me into college. And then I realized as I started budgeting after college that fully colored the way that I viewed my income after. So I just felt so much shame around, overspending in a budget category or going out to dinner. And I just didn't know how to have freedom in having an income post college.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really helpful place to start for people, is just like, how did you hear your family talk about money growing up? And even as we're having this conversation, what kind of emotional response is coming up for you?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. As I think about, it would be interesting to sit down with my parents and ask, like, compare notes. So I say this being only one part of the equation, and it's been a long time since I was, a little kid at home observing my parents, and there's so many things about money that I wouldn't have even known to interpret a particular way until now, looking back. But like I don't remember having huge conversations around money. Like, I remember I grew up in a home that was my parents were both very open. I could ask lots of questions about basically anything. And most things, they would at least broach the topic with me, and they would do it in a way that was age appropriate. So I very much appreciate that. But I remember having a very open line of communication with my parents. That being said, I don't remember talking about money a lot, but I do remember a couple of things that stand out to me of just like moments in history. One was when my brother was born, and he was born with like some medical complications that required him to be in the hospital for a really long time, like surgeries and just extra care from doctors, being in an isolette for quite a while. And just us going to the hospital and visiting him, and that I know like took a financial toll on our family. And I remember us going from I grew up when I was first born. We were in a home that we rented from somebody, and then a few years later bought a house and moved into that. And then shortly after my brother was born, sold that house and actually moved back into the house that we had been renting. And again, I don't remember specifically talking to my parents about this. So mom and dad, if you're listening, forgive me if I'm wrong. But my interpretation of that is that because of like some significant financial things that happened, we had to change the way that our housing, like the way that we paid for housing. And that was a formative moment for our family in the way that we related to money, how much access we felt like we had to money, and then the things that we could do as a result of that. And it is interesting when I think about graduating from college and knowing that I had gone to like private college, a private Christian college, and then grad school, that I was like, boy, I've got a mountain of debt to take care of. I really hope that I can get a job that pays me a lot of money so that I can A, eliminate my debt, and B, do the fun stuff that I would like to do in my life. And that a job that pays lots of money is going to be the way for me to take care of both of those things.
Yes. I love that illustration too, because I think after college, we kind of go one or maybe even both ways, where we both feel that kind of fear and scarcity. That feeling immediately kicks in of, oh, it's not enough. Like I need to start thinking about, how do I build up this income? How do I build up my emergency fund and save money? And now I can finally get the security that I've been craving or even saw my parents not have. Or we also go towards, this is it. Like I finally get to do the things I want. Like I'm uninhibited and I've got money to spend and I just don't have to worry about it anymore. And live almost too much into the freedom of, this is mine and for my spending and my entertainment and joy. And I think it's possible for us to hold both at the same time, although I think some of us tend maybe towards one or the other. And so without being really intentional and thinking through, what am I carrying? What narratives am I carrying into this? What beliefs about who I am, who God is? even just considering what is God's intention for the money that's coming into my bank account, then I think
Mm.
we automatically fall into those two places. And I said money's insidious because we all do that, but it's just this huge area where, because a lot of us grew up not talking about money or hearing that it's this really personal thing, it's not a place that we have a lot of people speaking into. And so it's easy to just almost go our whole Christian lives with this one dark place that's without discipleship or accountability. We just view money as this thing we can do what we want with it. And it doesn't matter how we view it.
Right. Well, and it's so closely tied to, I mean, everything that we do. If you're going to school, there's a financial component to that. If you want to eat lunch today, there's a financial component to that. If you want to go hang out with your friends, more than likely, even if you're going to do something free, it probably costs you money to get there, like to put gas in your car so you can drive and meet up at the park and, do whatever you're going to do there for free. It's still, there's money there, and we engage with money without thinking about it so often.
Yes.
It is so easy to understand why it can just creep in and take over.
Yes. And it's such a manifestation of our God complex, where we're like, well, I earned this. So this is the one area that I get to decide. Other people don't get to look at what I'm spending. They don't get to tell me how to spend it. Like, I earned this. This is the direct reward for the work I've put in. And so I have the agency to get to tell people, that this is how I want to spend my money. I can save it all if I want. I can give if I feel like it, but I don't have to. People don't know the debt I have. So I get to worry about that. Other people don't. And we're called as Christians to give away to other people things like time and energy and talents, and things like churches and volunteering often encourage us to give away our time. And so they make us wrestle with the discipleship piece. But I think there's a part of us that kind of can shut down when we're being asked to give, or kind of tune out when the church does the offertory, because it's just a little Gollum, like, it's mine, it's my own. Like, other people don't get to speak into this, I think we often believe, nor should they. And so there's a lot of ways that money shapes us internally that other people don't get to see, and that we are not often forced to do the work of that with the Lord. And God knows that. I mean, he talks about money so much in scripture. I'm sure you'll have people to piece that out later too. But Jesus knows that that's how we're wired. And that's why he talks about money. I mean, the Bible mentions money like over 2,000 times, because God knows this. And yet we still manage to make it kind of this discipleshipless area in our lives.
Yes. So, I mean, it sounds to me like there's more than just the experiences that we grew up with, like with our family. There's more that's speaking into it than just that. I mean, Emily, what are some of the things that you're learning about, like, the influence of culture and what's happening in the world, and the influence that has on the way that, our narrative about money?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, in addition to family, culture is a huge shaper. And by culture, I think we mean location. Like, there was a culture in Northern Virginia that I grew up in that was different than other cultures, in other places that people might have heard. But then obviously ethnicity and culture in other countries plays a role. If that's a shame or fear or guilt culture, that plays into it. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about in Ivy is even generational culture. There's like shifts every couple years in how things like money, financial wealth, jobs, work are all talked about. And so we're even seeing one of those shifts now. I always hesitate to talk about some of the generational stuff, because I know that there's people that don't, we don't want to ever put people in boxes, and these are big trends we're talking about. And so I want to name that and say, I know this isn't, just true for everyone or one size fits all, but there is some evidence that, this generation that's coming through college right now does view wealth and finances in a way that's really different than the generations before them. And even, I think, views work differently. There was a 2018 Barna research study that was kind of comparing what are the main markers that each generation sees for adulthood? Like, when they say, this is what it means to be an adult, what kind of comes up? And for, I think, the older generations, it was like marriage and family. And then for the millennial generation, which I fall into, it was kind of fascinatingly emotional maturity and intelligence. So how
Huh.
well do you know yourself, and how there was just a big value on maturity and who you're becoming. And this generation, the majority of them view financial independence as the key marker
Huh.
of adulthood. So being financially independent is the goal. And I think we're seeing a lot of trends around the need for security, which makes total sense. I mean, the world, there's just a lot going on in the world. This
Yes.
generation that's in college has lived through several financial crises, lots of inflation, and is more aware. And I think even surrounded, inundated by information about that than any generation before them. So they're getting the reels and the TikToks about
Right.
inflation and about how to save and what's happening with banks in a way that just generations before weren't. So there's a lot more fear, but I think there's also just there's a much stronger desire for security. And so
Hmm.
we're seeing just financial independence is super important to students coming through college. And that has lots of implications, including viewing work and jobs as primarily a means to financial independence versus, I would say, the millennial generation viewed jobs and work as more of the end, or it was a means to make an impact in the world. And so that was
Hmm.
where you saw a lot of the previous generation go into nonprofit and impact work, but at the cost of a lot of millennials are also still in debt and are now starting families and struggling with financial realities. And so
Yeah.
the people that are coming after them are looking at that saying, yeah, that impact isn't worth it. Like, I would rather just
Hmm.
go into a job, do the thing I need to do, and try to retire early. The trend is FIRE. It's financially independent, retire early. That's like the
Okay.
dream for a lot of
Yeah.
college students that I hear about in discipleships and stuff, and even in how they're thinking about majors and jobs. And so that just changes. It changes like what does it mean for me to pick a job, and what is vocational calling? It just
Hmm.
changes the way that I view money as I'm thinking about income after college. So all of these things in our culture and these cultural conversations we're hearing on campuses, in our families, in our regions, like where we're from, and then I think also on social media, are all influencing the narrative we have around what is the purpose of money in my life. Is it for me? And if it's for me, then what is the main thing I'm supposed to do with it? And there's, yeah, just a huge trend towards the thing I'm supposed to do with it is find security. And that has a lot of implications. Yeah.
Yes. This is all really helpful, even just for me, Emily, like to talk through these things, because I am also a millennial. I think I actually fall into like the elder millennial category, like just missed the tail end of Gen X by, just a handful of years, not by
Yeah.
much. And so my experience with finances has been different, and my access to what's happening in the world and even just nationally is different than what a lot of Gen Z has experienced. Because I was in college when the housing market crashed. That was a huge deal, like major impact that had. But I remember like watching these reports happening on the news in the townhouse that I was in and being like, this doesn't sound good, but I don't see how this impacts me, and was able to just like sort of continue on with my day and not really notice anything fluctuating. Now, like all I have to do is jump on Instagram and I know like I have people explaining to me why the things happening around the world have an impact on me right here. Like people are putting it into my language for me as somebody who's not a financial expert.
Yeah.
And so that is like, for me, that's really helpful to know, because most of our audience is Gen Z that are having this experience. So even for me to be able to hear these things from you and say like, okay, this is helping frame my, elder millennial financial brain to think more like, okay, what's the experience that Gen Z is having? And I hope it's helpful for any of our Gen Z listeners, even just to have a moment of like, are there one or two of these things that do stand out to me of like, oh, I kind of swim in this water all the time and I'm not really thinking about it in this way. When you say that, that helps me reflect a little bit and notice like, oh, maybe I do tend towards this part or that part of this. Maybe not this one so much, but like I'm in here. I'm in this conversation somewhere. So I know, like you said, we don't want to pigeonhole people. Like we don't want to like slap a label and say 100% of this applies to every person that's listening. But I wonder if there's some helpful moments for each person to keep in mind of like, that does ring true for me. And, oh, you're telling me that this is a discipleship issue.
Yes, I love that. And I think, the Lord always, he calls us as disciples to be the people that we are. Like he knows that we're all unique and have our own stories. And so while I caution against people having the kind of, oh, I'm the exception mindset, like, well, okay, but you don't know how much debt I have. That's why I don't have to tithe. Or you don't understand how little my family had growing up. That's why I will always save, and so I'm like, I caution against the thing that wants us to opt ourselves out of discipleship moments. And at the same time, the Lord calls us into this place as he does all the others, which is as we are. And so there's going to be growth. There's going to be ways that we each need to grow. And that is going to be different. It's going to be a different path of sanctification than the other people around us because we're unique. And so for me in my story, I'm always going to tend towards being fiscally conservative and wanting to save over spending and always be a little anxious around money. And God isn't calling me to be someone I'm not or to just erase that narrative entirely. But it does mean that for my relationship with him, I just need to know that that's where I tend. And so often when I'm, being offered there's a discipleship moment, or I know that my heart isn't in a great place with money, it's usually around generosity because that's my story. And that's the thing that helps curb my desire to just want to like save and hoard, or even to spend a little bit and to live into the freedom of the Spirit. And that is just going to be different than the people around me that have a different story. And also around the generational difference in the church, I think too, it's a really good reminder to just be compassionate for this generation that is coming out of college. I see a lot of really negative, or I would say even critical lines of thinking from people that are in the church that see this generation giving less than generations before them, or, they judge them for wanting to retire early and kind of being obsessed with thinking about the best way to spend money. And I just think that we need to move into a better place of compassion as the church, and to be aware of the ways that, we don't have great teaching on this, I think, in most churches. And when we do, it's not always updated. It's not always in touch with what our younger generation or young adults are experiencing. And so when I hear 22-year-olds talk about why they don't want to tithe, or why, the scarcity mindset that they have, instead of the church's response being, well, you know what, you just need to do it because we've all done it, or just listen, just put something in the offertory. I think it needs to lead us to a place of, okay, yeah. And there's also the cost of college is higher than it's ever been. There is more debt than ever before. Don't even get me started on the situation in the housing market. And so that doesn't mean there's not room for teaching, or that, again, we get to like opt out people for this discipleship moment, but to recognize that how can we really love students that are coming out of college or in their 20s, and acknowledge that they're being inundated with so much bad news about the economy, and with these narratives that everything is falling apart, and the reality of things like debt and inflation. And how can that lead us into a more compassionate teaching around money? That just sort of acknowledges those generational gaps. I think when we ignore those, that's when we really turn people off to any of the teaching, even the parts that are still relevant.
Yes, absolutely. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna use it as a metric. I don't know that that's what you're saying, but that metric that you're saying of like, like be wary of the thing that makes you say I get to opt out of this. and to say like, maybe that's a place actually to lean in and say like, why is that my response? And yes, for those of us listening who are not Gen Z, but who still have discipleship work to do around money, what does it look like to look at other generations with compassion that maybe we don't necessarily understand, and say like, what can I learn from the experience that you're having, and why that you have the perspective that you do, and that might help open the doors for more beneficial conversation around some of these ideas.
As you think about your personal origin story with money, what things come to mind? What are the examples you've had that influence the way you think about giving, saving, spending? What observations have you made about the world around you that influence you? What are the circumstances in your personal life, whether inside or outside your friends' and family's control, that have influenced your perspective on money? Whether we realize it or not, we have a personal narrative around money. Throughout our lives, there have been influential moments that have altered our trajectory when it comes to the way we think about and use money. And some of those things pull us toward a healthy relationship, and some of those things pull us in the other direction. And most, if not all, play an important role in our discipleship with Jesus and the way that we treat other people. My hope is that this conversation and the rest of this series helps us dig further into the heart issues at play here, and that it helps us develop some practical skills for being wise, healthy, and productive with the resources that God has given us. Emily, thanks so much for joining us this week and helping us get a solid start to this new series. Now that we've talked about our personal narrative around money, next week, let's see what Scripture has to say on the topic. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today, alumni. If there was anything that you learned, really enjoyed, or that encouraged you from today's episode, would you send us a DM or tag us in a story? We'd love to hear about it. You can find us at After4Pod on Instagram and Facebook. And if you haven't already, take just a second to unlock your phone and subscribe to the podcast. If your platform lets you, leave us a rating and a review. And if you like what we're doing here, share us with your InterVarsity or other post-graduation friends. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you in the after, alumni.